camera on the back. Also has a new 16 megapixel camera, good for 4K video recording, and is IP67 certified. So that means it's dust and water resistant. So you could submerge this in 1 meter of water for up to 30 minutes. So we're going to actually test that in this video. Alright, so in terms of specs, I'm actually using the SM-G900H version, which is the version sold in Latin America. So this means I have the Exynos octa-core processor, but most people will get the version with the Snapdragon 801 processor, which is a quad-core processor. The Exynos is an octa-core processor, so it combines 2 quad cores, 1.9 GHz quad-core Cortex-A15 and a 1.3 GHz Cortex-A9. Alright, so this has 2 gigs of RAM, just like last year. Also, it comes with 16 gigs of storage, and it does have a few other storage options, but you can use the micro SD card slot to expand storage all the way up to 128 gigs, and you can load apps on that card thanks to TouchWiz. So there is a new version of TouchWiz with this. So let's go ahead and unbox this thing. I'm just going to crack the lid here. Now, as you can see, I have the white version, but this is available in black, gold, as well as blue, and I'm sure other colors are coming. We're going to set that aside for just a minute while we take a look at the accessories. So again, SM-G900H quick start guide. So we have our Samsung in-ear headphones with the inline mic and volume controller. They also give us additional ear tips if you want to find the ones that fit your ears. And then we also have our Samsung USB wall adapter for USB charging cable. Now in this case, it's a USB 2.0 cable, so they did not give us the USB 3.0 cable that this device actually supports, so that's kind of interesting. All right, we also have our battery tucked in here. Let's pull that out. So once again, this battery is 2800 milliamp hours, and it also integrates the NFC technology as well. All right, so let's take the plastic off our GS5. So we got a little label back here. There we go. We have that new back panel, which Samsung calls Modern Glam. You can see it kind of has a shimmery quality to it. It actually kind of looks gold when I look at it right now. I'm not sure if that's being picked up on the camera, but it's not quite that white color. It's got a pearlescent color to it. We also have a label on the front protecting the screen. And I see we have one more piece of plastic covering the camera lens. And we have another piece of plastic covering the door for the USB 3.0 port. All right, so the first thing I want to do is install our battery. So I'm going to use this little thumbnail port here for popping off the back panel. Now, if you look at the inside of the battery cover, you'll see part of that IP67 certification, which is the seal that goes around the internals of the chassis here. It seals in the battery as well as the other sensitive parts that you don't want exposed to water. Now, as you can see, we have our combination micro SD and SIM slot. This is a micro SIM, not a nano SIM, so you do have to install your SIM first. You can also install your SD card slot right on top of that. So let's go ahead and pop this in. Now, wireless charging is available here, but you do have to buy the accessory, which is a kit, which I will plan on reviewing at a later date. Now, down here we have our waterproof speaker, which as you can see is not sealed up with the cover. All right, so I'm going to pop on the back panel. Snaps into place. All right, so let's go ahead and boot this up for the first time. So we get a new Samsung splash screen and animation. Alright, so let's take a look at the design of the GS5, which is pretty familiar. The big difference here is the back panel, which Samsung is calling Modern Glam. Now basically, that's referring to the soft touch material along the back, which has this sort of golf ball-like texture to it, with this pearlescent finish, which differs, of course, depending on what color you get. It seems to be more noticeable on the blue color, but as you can see, it kind of does a nice job picking up the light, gives you a little more design and material interest here. So we have a little bump out here for your loudspeaker here, prevents you from accidentally covering up the speaker when you lay it flat on a table. Toward the top, you'll find your Samsung branding along with that 16 megapixel camera module, which also has your LED flash right below that, as well as your heart rate monitor, which includes an LED light as well as a sensor for picking up your heart rate, which we'll demonstrate in this video. Now, as you see, this camera kind of sticks out. It does support 4K video recording. Unfortunately, that does not include optical image stabilization. Now, along the side, you'll find that chrome finish, and if you compare this to the GS4, you can see they've changed the design a bit from this brushed metal to this nice shiny chrome finish, which gives you a little more of a jeweled effect. You also have your sleep-wake button, which appears to be slightly smaller on the GS5. You also have your thumbnail port for popping open the GS5 and GS4 in the same location. Toward the bottom, you see, of course, a difference here. You have your flap covering the USB port, and of course, this is USB 3.0 versus USB 2.0. So you pop this off. Let's see if I can pop it off. So if you pop it off again, you see the USB 3.0 port is larger You also have your microphone in the same location. Along the right-hand side, you'll find your volume rocker, again in the same location. Now along the top, they switch things around a bit, so we have our headphone jack on one side versus the other side. Same with the IR blaster. We also have our pinhole mics on the same side here, next to the IR blaster versus next to the headphone jack. Now the GS5 has cleaned things up a bit here, so we have these two sensors, ambient light sensor and proximity sensor, along with an sRGB sensor built into these sensors, along with our camera module, which is in the same location, front-facing camera, good for 1080p video, while the GS4 had 3 sensors. So one of them was sRGB, one was proximity sensor, one was an ambient light sensor. So they've cleaned it up a bit. Now you can see that the earpiece is a bit smaller on the GS5 versus the GS4. Now toward the bottom, we also have new Android controls here. So we now have our recent apps button and a back button versus a menu button and a back button on the GS4. Now the home button is also different here. So we now have a fingerprint sensor or fingerprint scanner built into the home button, which you swipe on to unlock, versus the standard home button on the GS4. Now the interesting thing here is that it looks like there's no visual cue that tells you that this is a fingerprint sensor, so it's almost completely invisible. Now if you look at the GS4 versus the GS5, it looks like the LED flash was a bit bigger than on the GS5, but it appears there is no difference in terms of overall performance. Now let's take a look at the size difference between the GS5 and the GS4. So on the right we have the GS4, which as you can see is thinner and smaller than the GS5. Now the GS5 is 5 inches, this is 5.1 inches, so it looks like the device itself, the bezel around the display, has increased in size exponential to the display itself. So they've increased the bulk of the phone to accommodate more features, a larger battery, as well as... I just want to cover some of the major new features or the major hallmark features with the Galaxy S5, and then we'll get into the extreme details of what's new. So first up is the fingerprint sensor, which again is integrated into the home button. Now it's not active by default. In fact, it doesn't even train you when you activate the device for the first time. So in order to activate it, you have to go to settings. So I'm going to go up here to settings for my drop-down notification shade, go to fingerprint scanner, and go to fingerprint manager. So basically all I have to do is train one of my fingers. I'm just going to use my index finger right now and go through the setup process. So this is very similar to the setup process on the iPhone 5S, but the technology is very different. We're using a swipe gesture as opposed to an image sensor, which actually images your finger. This is actually detecting the capacitive characteristics of your finger as opposed to the image of your finger. Now I have to set up a password, so I'm going to use one with a letter. Click continue. Do it again. So if the fingerprint sensor fails, what you would have to do is enter in your password. Now if you go to the lock screen now, you get this little indicator telling us to swipe across the lock screen to unlock it. And of course it only works with the finger you train. So for example, if I use another finger here, it tells me select the entire pad. And if I keep doing that and it fails enough times, it will prompt me to enter in my password. Now I think most people would prefer to use their thumb to unlock their device. So let me go ahead and train my thumb, and I think there's a trick in order to train the thumb so you can actually do this one-handed. So I'm going to go back to settings, I'm going to go back to finger scanner, go back to fingerprint manager. I have to swipe my index finger to make changes, and I'm going to go ahead and add another finger. Click OK. So I'm going to train my thumb in the position I would normally use it to unlock it, kind of the side position. And as you can see, if you don't quite make a full swipe, it will tell you to re-swipe your finger. So now if I go to my lock screen, swipe down, you can see it actually works. Now